Well, let's dive right in. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. We've got a huge turnout, and I really appreciate that. And I hope you all have had an opportunity to check out the sun and got to see something you've never seen before. And hopefully you'll be seeing something very similar on April 8th, just less of the sun there. But today we're going to talk about the upcoming solar eclipse that's going to occur on April 8th, which is a Monday. So plan to take off, call in sick, whatever. This is going to be a big day, and as I'll mention again later on, this will be the last total solar eclipse that will be visible from the United States until 2044. So it's nice to have it in our own backyard so we don't have to book airfare and spend a whole lot to be able to see something like this. Now we just have to travel a few hours and we can enjoy the splendor. So our outline today, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of eclipses. We will talk about the specifics about where you need to be, when you need to be there, what you can expect to see for the eclipse of April 8th. And then, most importantly, we will talk about viewing safety. Okay? And at the end, we'll do a Q&A session. I'm going to try to keep this about 45 minutes or so, but I definitely want to get to a lot of questions. And by the way, if this one's kind of a bright screen over here, we do have a darker version over there, so don't forget about that. There are lots of eclipses. There are, first of all, solar eclipses, which we're going to talk about extensively today, but then there are also lunar eclipses, and we'll just mention those briefly since they involve the same bodies, the Earth, Sun, and the Moon. Solar eclipses, for an eclipse to occur, or a solar eclipse to occur, the Moon must come in between the Earth and the Sun, which means that the Moon has to be in a new phase. And likewise with lunar eclipses, if the Moon is going to pass into the shadow of the Earth, then it must be on the opposite side of the Earth as the Sun. So that means it has to be in a full phase. And contrary to popular belief, the phases of the Moon are not caused by the shadow of the Earth. They're actually a different phenomenon, which we can talk about later. But the only time the Moon actually does interact with the shadow of the Earth is during the full phase, and that's not always. It's just on some of these full moons. And for a lunar eclipse to occur, the alignment does not have to be as precise as for a solar eclipse to occur, and that's because the Earth is bigger, it casts a bigger shadow, so it's easier for the Moon to get into that shadow than for the Earth to pass through the Moon's shadow. But for all eclipses, the Moon and the Sun must lie at or very near what's known as the line of nodes. So I'll come back to that term in just a little bit with a diagram to help explain that. But here is basically the two diagrams of what we just spoke about in that previous slide. The top view, this is the arrangement of the Earth, Moon, and Sun in a lunar eclipse. So the Moon's in the center. The Earth is in the center, the Moon is passing through the shadow of the Earth, and then for a solar eclipse at the bottom, the Earth and the Moon have essentially reversed positions. One thing to note is that these objects are not to scale in size or distance. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. The other thing to note is, and it's especially easy to see in this diagram up here because of the bigger shadows of the Earth, that there are two distinct shadows. There's the umbra and the penumbra. The umbra is that deeper inner shadow, and if you are in the umbra of the Earth, then you see the Sun completely blocked. Okay? If you are in the penumbra, which is the lighter outer shadow that completely surrounds this inner shadow, if you're in that penumbra, then you see only a portion of the Sun obscured. So for most of us, when we're in a solar eclipse, like for Nashville on April 8th, we will still be within the penumbra of the Moon because we will only see part of the Sun obscured. Granted, it's a lot, but we're not completely seeing the Sun obscured. But I had mentioned before that these diagrams are not to scale, which begs the question, well, how big is the Earth compared to the Moon, and how far are they from one another? So to do that, or to show that, I've got a little demo. Let me grab it over here and bring it back. All right. raise this up a bit. That's when I need a third hand there. All right. So hopefully everybody can still hear me all right. But what I've got here is a nice convenient folding yardstick, 36 inches long. And at one end, I have a 1-inch earth. So it's at the 0 mark on my folding yardstick. So the first question is, how big is the moon compared to the earth? So here we have a 1-inch earth. How big do you think our moon would be compared to that? So I'll give you a moment to think it over, or maybe chat with your neighbors. I'll give you a moment not to look it up online, no cheating. So how big do you think it's going to be? I heard a BB, maybe a centimeter. I like that defined measurement there. So a little less than ½ an inch. Anybody else? I heard 1/4 inch. It's like we've got an auction going up here. Can I hear you? I hear 1/4 inch. 1/3 of an inch? 3 feet. Okay, so an enormous moon. Okay. All right. 1/6 of an inch. So one of those answers is correct. It would be 1/4 of an inch. Okay. Now the other question is, if the Earth is at 0 on my yardstick here, how far away on average would the moon be from the Earth? And I will give you a hint, it is somewhere on this yardstick. It's not like 10 feet away.
20 inches.
I heard 20 inches, which would be, let's see, right about there. 23. 10, so way up here. 1.5 inches. So about right there.
4 inches.
And then 4 inches about right there. So on average, the moon is going to be, where is it here? Right about 30 inches away. Or in other words, the moon is about 30 Earth diameters from our planet. And again, that's on average. And we'll talk a little bit, we'll mention that a little bit in a bit, but the moon does change its distance from the Earth. So again, this is an average. If it's at its closest point to us, how much closer is it to the Earth? I heard 2 inches. And then I heard something like about 20 inches closer. Not saying that's wrong or right, just trying to let everybody know what I hear. I heard 1 inch, and in fact, 1 inch is about right. So at its closest to us, it's about like that. And when it's at its farthest from us, it's about right there. Changes its distance by about a little over 5% there. Okay, actually, it's a little bit more than that, but not that much. Okay. So on our slide up here, set this down. All right, we can bring the lights back down. Thank you. So on our slide up here, there is our Earth-Moon scale representation. Now, in order for us to have an eclipse, the shadow of that moon has to hit the shadow, or has to hit the surface of the Earth. So that's going to require a pretty precise alignment. Okay. Here's just kind of a diagram showing that. So here is our scaled down moon, then our Earth right there, and you might be able to see it better on that screen over there. But if you carefully look, you'll see that there is a dark inner shadow that's conical in shape, and then there's a lighter outer shadow surrounding it. And let me see if I can get this animation to play. There we go. So this is a representation of the 2017 eclipse, and you can just barely make out that shadow hitting our planet up there. Okay. So we said before that for a solar eclipse to occur, the moon has to be in the new phase. How often do we have a new moon? About every 28 days. It's actually about every 29.5 days, or roughly 1 month. That's how we get the term month for moon. How often do we have a solar eclipse occurring?
3 years.
I heard 3 years.
2 years.
Every year?
We do have one every year. In fact, we have usually 2 every year, about every 6 months. Okay? So we have new moons, and we also have full moons once a month, but we only have eclipses about twice a year. And the reason for that is something I mentioned earlier. It's called the line of nodes. The whole issue is that the moon does not orbit around the Earth in the same plane in which we see the sun travel through our sky. If the moon did orbit in that same plane, then every new moon we would have a solar eclipse somewhere on the planet, and every full moon we would have a lunar eclipse. But the moon's orbit is tilted by about 5 degrees with respect to the path of the sun through our sky. Okay? So that means whenever we have, or for most times, whenever we have a new moon, the moon ends up passing either above the sun in our sky or it's passing below the sun in our sky. And so we miss the shadow of it completely and we don't have an eclipse. So that red line here, that is the projected orbit of the moon. And then, of course, we go around the sun. The sun doesn't go around us. But from our viewpoint on the Earth, it looks like it does go around us. So we can imagine this blue line as being the orbit of our sun. Now, you'll notice that there are 2 points where those orbits intersect. Those are the nodes. So when we have a lunar or a solar eclipse, the moon is at one of these nodes and the sun is at one of these nodes, or those intersection points. They might be at the same nodes, they might be at opposite nodes. When we have the sun, say, at this node and the moon at that node, we have a solar eclipse. Okay? Now, how often, so let's say we have a solar eclipse today. How long will it be till we have a lunar eclipse?
6 months.
So I heard 6 months. It's a good guess. Typically that is correct. But usually we will also have a lunar eclipse either 2 weeks after or 2 weeks before a solar eclipse. So let's imagine we have the sun here and the moon's right here as well. We have our solar eclipse. It takes the sun 365 days to go around this circle here. But to get from here over to here takes the moon about 14 days, which means that if we have our solar eclipse and 2 weeks later the moon gets over here, the sun has barely moved from that spot. So we're still in a pretty good alignment. So we can have a lunar eclipse. So those eclipses come often in pairs. Okay? And those periods where we have a good enough alignment where we can have a lunar or a solar eclipse, those are called eclipse seasons, and they happen roughly every 6 months. Okay? Here is a map of the U.S., or actually a map of the world, showing total and annular solar eclipses from the years 2001 to 2020. Okay? We'll talk about annular eclipses in just a little bit, but here is the path of the August 21st, 2017 eclipse that I hope everybody in here saw about, what was that, 7 years ago now? I can't believe it's already been 7 years. But those total eclipse paths are in blue, and then the red eclipse paths are the annular eclipses. Okay? And there's even kind of a fuchsia color on here. It's hard to see. But those are called hybrid eclipses. And if we get time at the end, I can mention what those are. But those hybrid eclipses, that's where you see these really, really thin bands. Okay? Now, let's go forward another 20 years. Here are the solar eclipses for 2021 to 2040. So here's April 8th, 2024. Okay. And then here is the eclipse that a lot of us saw as a partial eclipse last October. Okay. So that was an annular eclipse. That's where the sun is, or compared to the moon, the sun is a little bit too big to be completely covered up by the moon. And so if you're in the right spot, you will see the sun for a brief moment appear as a ring in the sky. Right? Now this is for 20 years. What if we looked at 1,000 years? Okay.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Little fun fact, if you experience a total solar eclipse wherever you happen to be standing, on average it'll be about 500 years before another one passes over that same area. For Nashville, I think it was a little bit greater than that. Our next total solar eclipse will be a little bit more than 500 years from now. But some places like Carbondale, Illinois, they saw the 2020 or the 2017 eclipse. They're going to see the April 8th, 2024 total eclipse. So some people get really lucky. You may say those poor little penguins down in Antarctica, they don't get to see much at all. Well, remember, in this type of map here, Antarctica looks enormous but it looks much bigger than Russia, but it's actually much smaller. So it's just a distortion effect, okay? All right. I mentioned just for a moment that we were going to talk about lunar eclipses. So here are a few images I took, probably about 10 years ago of a total lunar eclipse. You can see the moon passing into the deeper, darker shadow of the Earth here. And then once it got fully within that shadow, we exposed the image a little bit longer, and you see the moon has a much deeper, redder color than normal. You can see it a little bit better over there. That redder color is just because sunlight is passing through our atmosphere. Okay? If we did not have an atmosphere, the moon would not glow that red during an eclipse. Okay? And it's also a similar effect that when you see the moon rising, it often looks very reddish or kind of yellowish in color. And that's because as all those colors of white light come through our atmosphere, the bluer colors get scattered around and don't make it to our eye as much. And so, but the redder colors aren't scattered as much, and so we see those colors much better. Those blue colors get scattered around, and that's why we have a blue sky. It's not reflections of the ocean or anything like that. If you think back to one of those very first slides about the different types of eclipses, there was also something called a penumbral eclipse. And this is where the moon just skirts the outer edge of our shadow. And so even at greatest eclipse, I'll just use this one over here, you can see that there's not much darkening to the moon. In fact, a lot of people wouldn't even notice it if they weren't told a penumbral eclipse is occurring. March 20, I can't remember, is it the 23rd or the 24th, we actually have a penumbral lunar eclipse. It'll occur in the early morning hours, but next year, around this time, we'll have a nice total lunar eclipse. Alrighty, so we've already shown this diagram of a total eclipse where we have the moon coming in between the Earth and the sun. And for most of the US, we're going to be standing in this outer lighter shadow, and we're going to see a partial eclipse. But you can see how there's a little point of this cone, of this umbra, that hits the surface of the Earth, and that is where you're going to experience totality. You have to be within that inner shadow to see the total solar eclipse. So a lot of the US will see something like this on April 8th. Nashville will see about 95% of the sun covered. So it's going to be a really thin crescent in our sky around 2 in the afternoon. But if you are in totality, you'll get to see something like this. I'd recommend watching this one over here. Trying to turn that down a bit, but I don't think I can. This was a video that was made of the 2017 eclipse, and the photographers had programmed, hold on a second here, can't talk over the music. The photographers had actually set up some robotic scopes that once they were told to start observing, the telescopes would actually pan around the edge of the sun and take images. So it gives you kind of a live view of this eclipse and shows some of the features that you can see. But it's really a remarkable video. It's a couple minutes long. Those are prominences. That's what many of you saw in the telescope outside today. In this video, before I return to the very loud music, the moon from the viewpoint is actually moving kind of downwards. Okay, so kind of make a mental note of how big these prominences look. And once the moon reaches the edge of the sun, they're going to look much bigger because part of those prominences are still hidden by the moon. Okay, back to the music. So, yeah, if you saw the 2017 eclipse, you'll remember something like that. These images are beautiful, but yeah, there's nothing like seeing it with your own eyes. So here are just a few views. This is from Australia. I believe this is 2012. Can't remember. Let's see. Yeah, 2012. This is from Antarctica. A total eclipse at sunset. This one is interesting, especially over here. You can see that the corona, this beautiful atmosphere of the sun that only becomes visible during totality, it's not just uniform. It's got structure to it. Like there are two big, thicker pieces right in here, and that's constantly changing. The atmosphere of the sun is constantly changing. This is an HDR image where the photographers took multiple images of different exposures. So the short exposures got the brighter parts, the longer exposures got the fainter parts, and then they combined them all to where you can bring out all the details. But what's interesting, not only do you see the incredible structure of the sun here, very, very intricate, and this corona is outlining the magnetic field of the sun. If you look carefully, you can actually see features of the moon here. The reason this is glowing is because if you're on the moon during a total solar eclipse and you look back at the Earth is fully illuminated. We have a full Earth, okay? So the Earth has lots of reflective clouds. It's reflecting sunlight over to the moon, and that's what's actually illuminating that. Your eye wouldn't pick this out. It's just too dim, but these long exposures can pick that out, okay? And speaking of which, if you were on the moon watching the Earth during a total eclipse, that's what you would see. This is from the Discover satellite, and it's actually orbiting out farther from the Earth than what the moon is, and it was able to capture an eclipse here. Here's another, so this one you see the Earth rotating, but from a geosynchronous satellite that rotates with the Earth so that the Earth stays stationary in its viewpoint, you see something a little bit different. If this will play, there we go. There went the shadow right through there. So obviously this is sped up to where you can see the day pass through across the Earth there, and if you carefully watch, you can even see the reflection of the sun in the oceans there. So there's lots of these fun videos online. But anyway, the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. Basically, everybody in North America is going to see at least a partial eclipse. There's a very narrow band in which you have to be in order to be able to observe the total solar eclipse. You'll be able to see the partial eclipse before and after totality. But if you're in the right spot, you might get up to about 4.5 minutes of totality with this eclipse. In 2017, we had a maximum of about 2.5 minutes. For this one, for example, the moon is a little bit closer to the Earth, and so it is able to, it looks a little bit larger in our sky, and it's able to cover the moon, or excuse me, cover the sun for a little bit longer. And again, this will be the last total solar eclipse visible from the U.S. until 2044. In that next 20 years, we will have partial eclipses, but you'll have to travel to get to totality. So here is a path of totality. It comes, the shadow of the moon comes up through Mexico and then goes across most of the eastern U.S. So we are right here. So it's not that far of a drive to get into the path of totality. In fact, here is a close-up of Tennessee. You can see that path just barely touches the northwest corner of our state. So it's not going to be that far of a drive for us to actually get into that nice path. All right. And one thing I wanted to point out is, okay, so for reference, here's the northwest corner of Tennessee. If you happen to, I don't know, have relatives that live right there and you say, oh, I'm going to visit there and I'm going to be in totality, you'll be very disappointed because you'll only get a few seconds of totality. If you go from there to about there, you get about 2 minutes of totality. If you go from there to there, you get about 4 minutes of totality. And the reason for that is here is the shadow, the inner shadow of the moon, that umbra, at exactly 2 o'clock Central Time. And that shadow, that circular shadow, roughly circular shadow, is moving that way. So if you're right here, you're just going to catch this narrow little part of that shadow. Whereas if you're up here, you're going to pass through the widest part of that shadow and you're going to have the longest totality. So make sure you try to get as close as you can to the center of the path. For those that were in the 2017 eclipse, you noticed a lot of this. Obviously the sky is going to darken. Animals, especially birds and bats and insects, they behave like they do at dusk. You should notice a temperature drop. Planets and stars can become visible to the unaided eye. And you'll also get to see features of the sun that you normally don't get to see, especially that corona. One other thing I'll add to this line here about planets and stars is that there is also a comet that is brightening in our very late evening sky, and it'll be up during the day when this eclipse occurs. So it's projected that some folks may actually be able to see the comet. If you're taking photos, your camera will have a better chance of catching that comet, but there is still the possibility you might actually spot a comet during totality, so keep an eye out for that. This is one of the fun phenomena of total eclipse. So we're 60 seconds out from totality. Somebody has draped these large sheets of white paper against their car. Here's the shadow of the camera that is taking videos. And so the sun is a super thin crescent in the sky during this video, and that crescent is getting thinner and shorter as more and more of the sun is disappearing behind the moon. So now the sun is going from this big, super intense blob of light in the sky to this incredibly tiny, incredibly bright spot in the sky. And that allows you to see something called shadow bands. And you're going to notice that there's like these wavy patterns on this paper. You might see it better over there. But that is due to this incredibly tiny point of bright light in the sky shining through our moving atmosphere. If you've watched the bottom of a swimming pool, you see that same effect, but just much more pronounced because the water has a much better time refracting and bouncing that light around. Then we have totality there. So keep a lookout. You don't have to have white sheets of paper. When I was observing the eclipse, we were on a gravel road and we could very easily see that shadow band structure. So don't forget to look down as the sun is getting covered up there. This video I'm going to speed through, but this was, I think, I want to say it was in Norway, but it looks like it's a bright sun, but most of the sun is covered up in this exposure. And the shadow of the moon is coming from the west over there. And if I again refer to this side, you can see how the sky looks darker over here. And the shadow is moving across the surface of our planet about 3 times the speed of sound. And you can see it's coming more and more. The sun's getting a little bit dimmer. But if you're out in an open area, you can actually see that shadow coming your way. You'll definitely notice the sky getting darker and that darkness moving towards you. And then you can even see over in this area here, the part of the sky that is out of the shadow. So keep a lookout for that. And then we're in totality there. Now you can kind of see that shadow there. Okay? And you can gradually see it moving this way across the screen. So lots of fun effects to see. But of course, the main thing that you're going to see during totality is that beautiful corona. So this corona is it's actually about 1 million degrees Celsius. It's a very tenuous atmosphere of the sun. And it glows mainly because of scattered light from electrons in the atmosphere of the sun. When this is visible, and this is only visible when the sun's surface is completely obscured, this is perfectly safe to look at. It's only about as bright as the full moon. So you can stare at that all you want. And we often get the question asked, well, when do you know when to put the glasses back on? When that first tiny bit of sun starts to pop out, it is incredibly bright. And you're going to know, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of sun there. It's not going to instantly blind you, but don't just stand there and try to stare at that bright spot. You know, okay, time to look away, put my glasses on. And after a couple of seconds, that spot will have grown enough that it will produce so much light that this will be completely washed out again. Okay? But the pinkish glow that you can see around the edge of the sun, or around the edge of the moon here, and you can see it better over here, that is the chromosphere. That is one of the lower layers of the atmosphere of the sun. In fact, today when you were looking at the sun in the solar telescope, you were looking just at the chromosphere. It gets its name because of that deep red color. But some of those clouds of gas from the chromosphere can rise up, and you can see those prominences sticking off the edge there. Okay? And even just standing in totality looking at the sun, you might be able to see some of those prominences with your bare eye. If you're near the edge of totality, you often see a phenomenon called Bailey's beads, where the moon has moved just barely, almost in front of the sun here, but because of the irregular surface of the moon, sunlight is shining through valleys in between mountains on the moon. And so these little bright spots of light look like little beads outlining the edge of the moon. And then just before totality and just after, when that first bright spot of sun is visible, but you can still see the corona, you get that really cool diamond ring effect. Only lasts for a couple of seconds, though. Mentioning objects that could be visible, it's kind of hard to see over here, but over there, you should be able to see the planet Venus very easily. This is for 2024. So imagine we're lying on our back, just looking up at the sky. There is the totally eclipsed sun. And then on either side are two bright objects, which are Jupiter and Venus. And if you've got a pretty good sky, pretty open viewing area, you might even be able to pick out Saturn and Mars. And again, there might be a comet that could be visible to your eyes as well. Now, if you're not able to travel that day, this is what we'll get on April 8th here in Nashville, about 95% coverage of the sun there. So we begin losing the sun around 12:44, and then about an hour, a little less than an hour and a half later, the moon has moved as far as it's going to in front of the sun. We're going to be at maximum eclipse. And then shortly after 3 p.m., about 3:20 p.m., everything is completely over. Okay. Things to keep in mind, and this is one thing that we're considering because the staff of Dyer is planning on traveling that day. This is April cloud cover, and the thing to take away is that orange areas, like up in here, or maybe partially in Tennessee, that tends to be a significant amount of cloud cover. And then bluer areas are more favorable. So if you're planning on traveling, remember that path is coming up through Mexico and going up through the eastern seaboard. If you want to travel, then you might, try to head down towards the southwestern portion of the path if you want to kind of ensure that you're going to be in pretty good skies. Here's a little close-up view of that, just to give you a better indication. Of course, we're right smack dab in some of that yellowish orange, but you never know. And if you are, so here are some few statistics about this eclipse. Here is the path of totality right through here, and there's about 31.5 million people that lie within the path of totality. And just outside of it, within 100 miles, there's another 75.3 million people. Within 200 miles, there's another 150 million people. So there's a lot of people that are within driving distance of this total solar eclipse, which is, compared to the previous eclipse, its path in 2017 came down through here. So we were getting a lot of the more sparse regions of the U.S. in totality. So this eclipse is probably going to prompt a lot more people to try to observe it because, first of all, there's a lot more people within driving distance. And second, we went through the 2017 eclipse, and a lot of people who saw it for the first time have now caught eclipse fever, and they're going to try to catch it again, okay? So, yeah, you might want to, a lot of hotels are already sold out, but again, we're within driving distance. You could make it a day trip. You don't have to, worry about being in any particular spot. You can find a parking lot somewhere and watch it from there. In fact, here's a map talking about driving distance. So Nashville is in I think that's the 2 to 4 hour driving distance range. So a lot of these maps are from greatamericaneclipse.com. You can get high resolution versions there. And if you plan on going to other states to view, maybe like Illinois or Indiana, they have individual maps for those states. So you can get a really good idea of how much totality you'll have. Now, to finish up talking about the dynamics of eclipses, I just want to mention this. So here, we were talking earlier about how the moon changes its distance from the Earth by about 10%. So this is an exaggerated view of Earth's orbit around, or the moon's orbit around the Earth. So when the moon is near its closest point to the Earth, it's called perigee. And when it's at its farthest point, it's called apogee. In October last year, when we had that annular eclipse, the moon was near this point. So it was farther away, so it appeared smaller in the sky. So it wasn't able to completely cover the sun for anybody. Okay? And we had something called an annular eclipse. And let me see if I can find that right quick. There's a nice example of an annular eclipse. Okay? Now let me go back here. Let's see here. Yeah, so when we have the annular eclipse, we have the moon here, Earth here, sun here. Now 6 months later, as in April of this year, the Earth and moon system are not on this side of the sun, they're now on this side of the sun. So imagine taking this entire diagram and just shifting it directly to the left side of the sun. That means now the moon will be like right here, Earth will be right here, and the moon will be near perigee. So you'll now have a much, well, I shouldn't say much larger, but you'll have a larger moon in the sky, and you can now have a total solar eclipse. So often you will have an annular eclipse followed by a really nice total solar eclipse because of that changing distance of the moon from the Earth. Okay? So during an annular eclipse like we had in October, the moon is too far away. That penumbra, or excuse me, that umbra, that deeper inner shadow, the end of it actually doesn't reach the surface of the Earth. So nobody is in that umbra. So nobody gets to see totality. Okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about viewing aids, and then we'll do some questions. So this is what you really need to worry about getting for the solar eclipse. Doesn't matter where you are, you're going to need those glasses. If you happen to be in the path of totality, you're going to need the glasses before and after totality. We do have eclipse glasses, I think, in the back of the room. Yeah. If you're planning on ordering any more, order them now because we've got less than a month. But these glasses are not like regular sunglasses. They block all the infrared, all the infrared and all the ultraviolet light, which is what is bad for your eyes. But it only lets through about 1/1,000,000th of the visible light. So it brings the safe light down to a comfortable level. If you get those glasses, do not do something like this, where you put them on and you look at the sun with an unfiltered telescope. And for the record, I was not looking at the sun. Alex took the picture. She can testify to that. I don't remember. Okay. Like I said, she's right there. You heard it. She said I was not looking at the sun. If you do this, even a small telescope, it will focus all of that light and burn directly through those glasses. And it doesn't take like 10 minutes. It does it in just a couple seconds. And then all of that light goes right into your eye. And yeah, so never ever do that. We'll talk about telescopes in just a moment. If you can't find those eclipse glasses, you can use a welding glass. And the key here is to get a shade 14, 1-4. I think it's the bigger the number, the darker they are. And shade 14 is dark enough to safely protect your eyes for looking directly at the sun. These tend to have kind of a greener color, so it's kind of neat. But you can get these at welding stores. Lots of home improvement centers have them. Lots of stores online. I've got an example up here if you're interested in that. If it happens to be cloudy that day, don't try to use clouds as your viewer. Even though the sunlight is dimmed quite a bit, there's still a lot of infrared and ultraviolet coming through, and you can't feel that light as it's damaging your eyes. So I know it's tempting to do that, but please don't do that. Or do something like this. Even if you get those sunglasses that say 100% UV protection, that is not talking about looking straight at an intense source of light like the sun. They're good for the reflected sunlight, the ambient sunlight, but not direct exposure. So never do something like that. One of the other ways was using exposed X-ray film. I don't know of a good source of exposed X-ray film. So yeah, don't do that either. And one of the old-fashioned ways was using smoked glass. But yeah, you have the same problem. It's letting through a lot of light that can damage your eyes. So don't do any of those. If you want to try to observe the sun with a telescope, you want to get a filter that will fit onto the front of the telescope. So all the light gets filtered before it gets into the optics of the telescope. These are two different types here. They are made for these specific scopes, so they fit very snugly, so there's no chance of them coming off while you're observing. This particular one here uses a mylar type of filter. It's kind of like a film, but it's secured in a housing that snaps tightly into the end of this telescope. This one is a glass filter. I've actually got one over here. So if you want to come up and look at this one a little bit later on, this would have fit onto the front of a telescope as well. And sometimes when we have these, we just kind of hold them up and look at the sun as well. It's safe to do that. So different types of filters get you slightly different views of the sun, different colorations mainly. The one that we were using today, you can see it setting over there, that's a totally different type of filter. And I can talk to you about that later on if you're interested. If you're looking around online, you'll have a harder time finding these nowadays, but they are still out there. These are solar filters that were meant to screw into the eyepiece of your telescope. So they're tiny, so that means they were inexpensive, but all of that sunlight is being focused onto that tiny little piece of glass, and they were notorious for shattering, as you can see in this picture here. And right when they shatter, you're looking right into that. So you're going to get direct exposure and you can get severe eye damage before you're able to pull your head away. So if you see one of those, just toss them, okay? Don't ever try to use those. You can also project using an unfiltered telescope. So what we're seeing here is, here's the eye, or where the eyepiece would be of this particular telescope. It does not have a filter on it. But what it's doing is focusing the light over to a piece of paper that is mounted to the back of this particular telescope. So you're just projecting the image of the sun. And that's a great way for, especially if you've got groups of people coming by, they can see it. The paper is in the way. You want to make sure that there's no way somebody can stick their head in between it and the telescope to try to look into the eyepiece. So just kind of keep that into consideration. And also, if you're not careful and you don't have the telescope aimed properly, and the light starts to get focused onto the inside of the scope, it can damage the scope. So if you've got a scope that's been in the family for 500 years, I wouldn't recommend doing this because you could potentially damage it. But eyepiece or telescope projection is a great way to view. And you can even use pinhole viewers. On the right side, this is a colander, just held up. Those tiny little holes act as little masks that were able to project images of the sun. So if you look carefully at this image, especially right in there, you can see that there are little crescent suns. So here's the diagram, sun and moon, same part of the sky, shining light through that hole, and you project onto the ground or a piece of paper. You are not taking, for example, my little viewer here, I punched a hole in it, and you can use this for pinhole projection. You're not taking this and looking through it, okay? That's a big misconception. You're just taking this, holding it out. You can put your back to the sun, let the sunlight stream through that hole, and then look on the ground, and you'll see an image of the eclipsed sun. And if you're like me and you forget things and you leave that at home, well, just look around. Nature provides its own little pinhole viewers. So this is a tree that all the gaps in the leaves there are projecting little suns. There is even a neat way where you don't have to use even nature. You can turn your back to the sun and basically take your fingers and make a grid and hold them up, and you'll see little projected suns there. So to summarize, can you view a solar eclipse naked eye? The only time that you can do that is during a total solar eclipse. So during the partial eclipse, when any part of the sun is visible, any part of the sun's surface is visible, you have to have those glasses on, because 1% of the sun is literally 10,000 times as bright as the full moon, and that can cause irreparable eye damage very, very quickly. So during totality, that's when you're able to take those glasses off and you can see the splendor of a total eclipse. In fact, if you keep the glasses on and you're saying, oh, I just want to be extra safe, you're really going to be disappointed, because you won't see anything during totality. Those glasses would block out all of the total eclipse and you'd be really, really bummed. Okay? But yeah, once that little bit of sun starts to pop back out, put your glasses back on. And if you're unlucky, like the folks in Shanghai were in 2016 when they were in the path of totality, so this is before totality, you can still kind of experience the effects because it gets incredibly dark, especially with cloud cover during the total eclipse. Okay. So with that, I think that I have run out of slides and just about out of time too. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take any questions. And if you have to leave, don't forget that Alex has solar eclipse glasses. In fact, I think she's just passing them out now. So one other note about eclipse glasses, before you put them on, just kind of hold them up to the light and see if you see any little pinholes in there. If you do, toss them out. Get you a new pair. Okay? If they get severely scratched or really, really bent, then consider getting a new pair. Okay? So just do a quick check before you put them on. Okay? So, yes, question?
I was going to say, safety-wise too, when if you're looking through the scope with the filter on the end.
Yes.
The finder scope.
Very good point.
Recommended just to take it off.
Very good point. So what was being said is, if you're using a telescope to observe the eclipse, we put that filter on the front of the telescope, but telescopes often have finder scopes on them, which are these little bitty scopes that you use to help get the main one pointed at what you want to look at. Make sure that there's two things you could do. You could take that finder completely off so that you don't accidentally look into it. Or if you keep it on there, keep the cap on there, make sure that cap cannot come off, maybe tape it on there. And there are even little filters that you can get for the finder scopes if you wanted to. So, but yeah, very good point. Don't forget that that little bitty finder scope can do a tremendous amount of damage to your eyes if you look at the sun with it. Size really doesn't matter for these telescopes. Yes?
Yeah, someone told me to get some binoculars, those solar something binoculars.
Uh-huh.
Are they really protective during
They're-
totality?
There are manufacturers like the Orion Telescope Company that they also sell binoculars, but they'll make filters that securely mount to the front of binoculars. You just have to specify which ones you have to make sure you got the right size.
A regular, the whole thing was just a binocular just for
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I said, these are binoculars that are just for solar.
Oh, binoculars that are just for solar. Yes, those would be great to view as well. Yeah. Yeah, if you had the choice, I'd recommend get your regular binoculars and then get the filters so that you can use the binoculars when you're not wanting to observe the sun. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thank you all for coming. But yes, question. Time-lapse photography, I don't have any resources off the top of my head. I honestly don't know. Gotcha. Yeah, there may have been one site that I came across a while back that had information about, these are roughly the exposures, but it's going to be so equipment dependent too, I honestly don't know. Yeah, you might look at sites like cloudynights.com that, it's a forum where astronomers get together and they share that kind of information. I'm sure there's people that have posted on there, here's like what aperture I've used, what exposure. It's like cloudynights.com. Yeah, that'd be a good one. I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head, but good luck with that. All right. Yes. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. So hybrid eclipses. I know everybody's like moving around here, but so we were talking about, we had mentioned the annular eclipse, we'd mentioned the total eclipse, and we'd mentioned the hybrid. The hybrid is when the moon is at just the right distance to where the tip of that umbra, I mean just the tip, is just touching Earth. So if you are, so imagine that you're the moon, and I'm the Earth, and the sun's back there. So as you're casting your shadow on me, that shadow is going to start sweeping across, let's say my stomach here. This part of me is farther back. It's going to be too far to be in that umbra, so it's going to be in the penumbra. It's going to see the annular eclipse. But when that shadow comes across here, these people are a few thousand miles closer, so they're actually close enough to be in that totality. But if you're in totality, it's very, very short, because that just the tip of that shadow is getting there. So yeah, those are the hybrids. Any other question? Yes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry? Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing everybody. All right, well, again, thank you all for coming. Oh.